On a lonely stretch of England's western coast, where the land ends in ragged teeth of slate and shale, and the sea breathes in long, slow sighs against the stone, there stands a lighthouse. It is not tall, not grand, not the kind you would find on postcards. It is simply there, a white stone tower, its paint bleached pale by decades of salt and sun, its red roof mossed at the edges like an old man's eyebrows. It perches on Widow's Reach, the narrow finger of rock where so many women stood waiting for sails that never returned. The sea here does not crash, it murmurs. It rolls in with the fog, a low, constant hush that fills the air like a held breath. Gulls cry not in alarm, but in quiet conversation, their voices carried on the wind like distant radio static. The light, the great turning beam from the tower, cuts through the dark not with urgency, but with patience, steady, relentless, faithful. For 43 years, a man named Elias Thorne tended that light. He was not a man of many words. He spoke more to the gulls than to people, and even then, only in murmurs. He kept careful logs in a leather-bound book, its spine cracked from use, its pages yellowed at the edges from salt and time. Each entry was written in neat, slanting script. Wind direction, barometric pressure, visibility, fuel levels. But sometimes, in the margins, he would add something softer, a quiet observation of the sea's mood, or on certain nights, just a single word that carried the weight of years. He polished the great glass lens until it shone like ice. Each facet caught the flame and threw it out to sea in a slow, steady sweep. He wound the heavy clockwork that turned the beam night after night. Without fail, his hands moved with the quiet certainty of ritual. His fingers were rough, his nails rimmed with grease, but his touch on the lens was gentle, almost reverent. He would run a cloth over each panel, whispering promises only the stones could hear. He checked the fuel each evening, pouring oil from a dark green can into the reservoir. The scent rose sharp and clean, like old libraries and storm clouds. He kept his tools in a wooden box by the lamp, a wick trimmer, a soft brush for dust, a small bottle of vinegar for smudges. Everything had its place. The stove in the corner glowed with banked coals, warming the room slowly. It filled the air with the smell of dry wood and iron. But Elias had a secret. He was not keeping ships safe from the rocks. He was keeping one ship close. Years before, his younger brother Jonas had sailed out on a fishing trawler that never returned. Jonas was only 19, bright-eyed, quick to laugh, with a habit of whistling off-key while he mended nets. Elias would roll his eyes at Jonas's boldness, but he always smiled. Jonas had a way of making the world feel lighter, like sunlight on water. The storm that took him came, without warning. One moment, the sky was clear, the gulls wheeling high. The next, the horizon vanished behind a wall of black cloud. The wind began to howl like a thing in pain. They searched for days. Men dragged nets through churning water. Every boat that could float sailed into the gale. But the sea gave back nothing. 3 weeks later, Jonas's oilskin coat washed up on a shingle beach 10 miles down the coast. It lay buttoned, as if he had just stepped out of it. Inside the pocket, a single smooth stone from the beach where they had played as boys, flat, gray, worn by the tide. Elias kept that stone in his own pocket for years. He would rub it between his fingers when the nights were long, feeling its cool weight, its familiar shape. After that, Elias applied for the lighthouse job, not for the pay, not for the solitude, but because from this tower you could see the exact spot where Jonas vanished. A patch of sea just beyond the black teeth of the reef, where the water ran deep and dark. The currents twisted like secrets no one could untangle. And every night, without fail, Elias climbed the spiral stairs. 127 steps. He knew them by heart. Each step creaked in its own voice under his worn boots. His hand rested on the cold iron railing as he ascended. At the top, he lit the lamp. The flame caught, steady and bright. Then he stood at the window, pressed his palm to the cold glass, and whispered into the wind. He never saw a ghost, never heard a voice, but sometimes, on still nights when the fog hung low like a shroud, he would swear the beam of light caught something out there, a shape in the water, a hand raised in greeting, gone before he could be sure. The villagers left offerings at his door, jars of stew, mended socks, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. Elias would find them at dawn, steam rising in the cold air. He would nod toward the empty path and whisper a quiet thank you. Winter nights were hardest. The wind howled through cracks in the shutters. Frost feathered the window panes like fragile lace. But Elias never missed a night. His hands might tremble, his breath might fog the air. He climbed the stairs, he lit the lamp, he kept the promise. Summer brought gentler hours. On clear nights, the stars crowded the sky, so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He would sit on the gallery with a cup of tea, watching the beam cut through the dark. The waves whispered against the rocks below. Time passed. His hair turned white. His steps slowed. But his hands still knew the work. Polish the lens, wind the gears, trim the wick, light the flame. The ritual was his language, his anchor, his love. He would stand at the window, press his palm to the cold glass, and whisper into the wind. His breath fogged the pane in soft, rhythmic clouds. The glass felt like ice against his skin. He never saw a ghost, never heard a voice. But sometimes, on still nights when the fog hung low like a shroud, muffling the world into silence, he would swear the beam of light caught something out there. A shape in the water, a hand raised in greeting, gone before he could be sure. The sea gave nothing away. He would stand there for hours, wrapped in his thick wool coat, watching the slow sweep of the light. The wool smelled of lanolin and wood smoke. His boots were damp from the stone floor, not with hope, exactly, but with steadfastness, as if his presence alone could be a kind of anchor, as if the light, steady and true, might guide not just a ship, but a soul. The villagers thought him odd, but they never mocked him. There is a quiet respect in coastal towns for those who wait. Their eyes held understanding when they passed him on the path. They understood that grief does not always shout. Sometimes it sits by a window. Sometimes it winds a clockwork. Sometimes it lights a lamp. Their silence was a gift. They would leave jars of stew on his doorstep before dawn. Beef and barley, rich with thyme and slow-cooked onions. The jars were wrapped in burlap to keep the heat in. Mended socks in a basket by the gate, darned with neat, even stitches. Wool thick enough for winter. The darning threads matched the sock color perfectly. A loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, still warm from the oven. The cloth smelled of yeast and wheat. A jar of blackberry jam from last summer's harvest, dark as midnight. The jam jar was sealed with wax. They never knocked, never asked how he was. They just left their offerings like prayers at a shrine and walked away, their boots crunching on the frosty gravel path. Their footprints faded by midday. Elias would find them at first light, steam still rising from the jar of stew in the cold air, the bread soft beneath the cloth. He would carry them inside, his hands warming at the stove. He would nod toward the empty path, as if they could still see him, and whisper a quiet thank you into the salt air. The wind carried his words back to the sea. Winter was the hardest. The wind howled through cracks in the shutters like a living thing. It rattled the window panes and moaned in the chimney flue. The sea rose, throwing itself against the cliffs like it wanted to tear the tower down. Waves exploded into white spray against the black rocks. Frost feathered the inside of the windows in delicate, branching patterns. It grew thicker each hour, blurring the view of the sea. The cold seeped into the stones of the tower. The oil thickened in the lamp reservoir, requiring extra care to pour. It moved slowly, like cold honey. He warmed the can near the stove before filling the lamp. But Elias never missed a night. Even when his joints ached with cold, even when his breath came in shallow gasps, he climbed the stairs. His boots scuffed the worn stone. His hand gripped the cold iron railing. The stairs were slick with damp in winter. He placed each foot carefully, feeling the familiar grooves worn by decades of steps. He lit the lamp. The flame caught slowly in the stiff wick. He shielded it with his hand until it steadied. He whispered the words. His hands might tremble, but they never faltered. The light must turn. The promise must hold. The clockwork gears clicked softly in the dark. Summer brought gentler hours. On clear nights, the stars crowded the sky, so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The Milky Way spilled across the heavens like spilled salt. He would sit on the gallery with a cup of tea, watching the beam cut through the dark. The cup warmed his hands. The steam curled in the night air. The waves whispered against the rocks below, a low, constant rhythm. It was the sound of the earth breathing. He could hear the pebbles shifting in the tide's pull. Time passed. His hair turned the color of sea mist. His steps slowed on the stairs. His reflection in the window showed lines etched deep by wind and salt. But his hands still knew the work. Polish the lens, win the gears, trim the wick, light the flame. His fingers moved with muscle memory, like a weaver at a loom. He would run his thumb over the brass fittings, feeling the smooth, cool metal. The fittings were worn shiny from his touch. The clockwork mechanism hummed like a sleeping cat. On the night he died, at 82, in his narrow bed by the hearth, a woolen blanket tucked around his shoulders like a promise, he was found with his logbook open on his lap. The fire had burned to embers. His final entry, written in a shaky but determined hand, spoke of the fog, the light, and a quiet certainty that what he had waited for was near. The ink was slightly blurred where his hand had rested. The lighthouse was automated soon after. The keepers left. The door was locked. The oil lamp replaced with an electric bulb that never flickers, never needs tending, never whispers. But locals say if you walk the cliff path on a quiet autumn evening, when the mist curls around the gorse and the air smells of wood smoke and brine, you will still see the light turn, not because of gears or electricity, but because some promises do not end with life. The beam cuts through the dark like a blade of silver, and somewhere in the mist, two brothers are finally walking home together. Their footprints leave no mark on the wet sand, not because the sea gave him back, but because love refused to let go. The tide carries the beam's reflection far out to sea, not because time healed the wound, but because devotion does not require healing. It only requires presence. The stones of the tower hold the day's warmth long into night. The light turns night after night, year after year, waiting, watching, remembering. The rhythm is as old as the sea, and if you listen very closely on the stillest of nights, you might hear it, not a voice, but a feeling, carried on the wind. I am still here. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, like the tide, like the stars, like the stone in a pocket worn smooth by years of quiet longing. The fog curls around the tower like a shawl. The gulls call once from the cliffs. The sea murmurs its endless song, and the light keeps turning. Deep in the rolling hills of northern England, where the land rises and falls like the breath of a sleeping giant, and the mist clings to the valleys long after sunrise, there stands a one-room schoolhouse. It is not on any map, not because it is hidden, but because the world has simply forgotten to look. The path to its door is overgrown with ferns and foxgloves, softening the edges of memory. Its paint is peeling and long, curling strips, the color once a cheerful cream, now faded to the soft gray of old bone. The wood beneath shows through in patches, weathered by decades of rain. Each strip curls like a dried leaf, trembling in the wind. Its windows are clouded with decades of dust, catching the low winter light in milky glows that shift with the hour. The glass fogs in the cold, blurring the view of the empty yard. Frost feathers the corners overnight, delicate as lace. Ivy climbs the chimney like it is trying to tuck the building in for a long nap. Its leaves rustle like pages turning in a book no one reads anymore. The ivy's tendrils curl around the rusted bell rope, binding it gently to the wall. The roof sags slightly in the middle, weighed down by years of rain and snow. The tiles are mossy and uneven, holding pockets of melted frost long into the morning. Rainwater drips from the eaves in a slow, steady rhythm. The front steps are worn smooth by countless small feet, now still. The wood is polished by generations of boots, scuffed by hurried departures and hesitant arrivals. Each step slopes slightly toward the center from years of tread. The bell that once called children in from play hangs silent on its rusted rope. Its clapper is frozen in place by age and damp, its voice long since stilled by time. The metal is cold to the touch, even in summer. It closed in 1937, not because of war, not because of money, but because the last families moved away, drawn to the city by the promise of factory work, steady wages, electric lights. Just 6 children had been left in the village by then. When they left, the school had no one to teach. The desk stood empty for weeks before the door was locked. But the building did not forget. Its walls hold the echo of small voices, the scrape of chairs on wood, the sigh of a child concentrating hard. Every winter, around the first frost, when the air turns sharp and clean, and the world seems to hold its breath, villagers report something strange. Their boots crunch louder on the path when they pass the schoolhouse after dark. The smell of chalk dust on cold air, sharp, clean, familiar, like the inside of an old pencil case. It drifts from the chimney on still nights, carrying the scent of dry clay and stone. The sound of children reciting lessons in clear, young voices. Not loud, but steady, as if practiced with care. The voices rise and fall like a tide of memory, fading before you can trace their source. And sometimes, if you pass by just after dusk, you'll see a single slate propped on the teacher's desk through the frosted window. Its surface holds the ghost of fresh chalk marks, pale against the dark wood. No one goes inside, not out of fear, but out of respect. The door remains shut, the key long lost. The lock is stiff with rust, yet it holds firm against the wind. Because the truth is, the school is not haunted by ghosts. It is haunted by devotion, a love that refuses to fade. It lingers in the dust motes dancing in sunbeams, in the warmth still held by the stove stones. The teacher, Miss Eleanor Pryce, believed every child deserved to be seen, not just taught but seen. She knew that learning begins not with facts, but with feeling safe. Her eyes never rushed a child's understanding. She would arrive before dawn, even in the deepest cold, to light the stove in the corner. Frost rimed the windows when she entered. Her boots left damp prints on the floorboards, the only footprints in the room. She would bank the stove with coal and kindling until it glowed like a heartbeat. The warmth spread slowly, evenly, pushing back the chill. By the time the first child arrived, their breath no longer fogged the air. The stove's iron plates hummed softly as they heated. She kept a basket by the door filled with dry socks, for wet boots, for snow, for tears. The socks were plain wool, mended at the heels, smelling faintly of lavender. Each pair was neatly folded, waiting like a promise. She had a jar of barley sugar on her desk. If a child struggled with their letters, she would offer one, her hand steady and warm. Her patience was a quiet thing, like sunlight through glass. The sugar cubes clinked softly when she lifted the lid. She would stay late to help slow readers sound out words. Her finger traced each letter slowly, giving the child time to find the shape of the sound. Her nail was worn smooth from years of pointing at pages. She would mend torn coats with needle and thread, humming old folk songs under her breath. The songs were about rivers and robins and mothers waiting by the fire. Her needle moved with quiet certainty, stitching warmth into wool. On birthdays, she baked small cakes, just enough for one child to feel celebrated. She placed them on a chipped saucer with a single candle. The candle flame flickered in the draft from the door, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She would light it, and the whole class would sing. Their voices were thin but earnest, rising together in the small room. For that moment, the birthday child was the center of the universe. The cake's sweetness lingered on every tongue long after the song ended. And on the last day of school, the real last day, in the spring of 1937, she wrote each child a letter. Not a note, a letter. Sealed in an envelope with wax pressed with a tiny flower stamp she had carved herself from a pear seed. The wax was warm and pliable under her thumb. She told Thomas he had the mind of an engineer. She She told Mary her kindness was a kind of courage. She told Billy his laughter was a gift. Her handwriting was neat, slanting slightly to the right. The ink was dark and steady on the page. She handed them out with steady hands, though her eyes were bright with tears. The children did not understand, not fully. They hugged her, thanked her, ran off to summer adventures, their boots kicking up dust on the road. Their laughter faded down the lane like birdsong. But Miss Pryce stood in the doorway long after they had gone, watching the empty road, her shawl pulled tight against the cooling air. The wind tugged at her sleeves. The door creaked softly behind her. The hinges sighed like an old friend tired of waiting. When the village emptied, she locked the door but left the stove burning low, just in case someone came back. The latch clicked shut, but the chimney still breathed smoke into the twilight. The smoke curled upward, a gray ribbon against the darkening sky. They never did come back, but the school still keeps the stove warm. Embers glow in the dark, breathing softly through the night. And if you pass by on a cold December night, when the moon is full and the frost paints silver on every branch, you might see a wisp of smoke curling from the chimney. It rises straight and steady in the still air. The smoke carries the scent of wood smoke and dry warmth into the frozen night. You might hear, ever so faintly, the sound of a ruler tapping gently on a desk. The tap is precise, patient, calling class to order after all these years. The sound echoes in the hollow of your chest, familiar as a heartbeat, not because it expects students, but because it still believes they deserve to be taught. The belief is woven into the floorboards, the desks, the very stones of the walls. It lives in the smooth curves worn by small hands gripping desk edges, not because it clings to the past, but because love, once given, does not know how to stop. It lingers in the dust motes dancing in the light. It settles into the wood grain like sap hardening into amber. Inside, the desks remain in neat rows, their wooden surfaces scarred with initials and pencil marks. The scars tell stories of boredom and daydreams, of small triumphs and quiet frustrations. Some initials are deep, carved with pocket knives on long afternoons. The blackboard is clean, waiting. Its slate surface gleams faintly in the moonlight that slips through the frosted windows. Chalk dust coats its lower edge like pale snow. The globe in the corner still turns, though no one spins it. The air currents in the room move it slowly, tracing invisible paths across oceans and continents. Its painted countries blur into streaks of color in the dim light. The books on the shelf sit upright, spines unbroken. A child's garden of verses, the wonder book of knowledge, tales from Shakespeare. Their pages are thick with dust but unblemished by time. They hold their breath. The leather bindings crack softly when the air shifts. On certain nights, the chalk dust stirs not from wind, but from memory. It floats in the slanted light like tiny stars, settling on the open pages of an arithmetic primer. The primer's pages are stiff with age, the numbers faded but still legible. It settles on the rim of the barley sugar jar, still half full on the teacher's desk. The jar catches the moonlight, turning the sugar crystals into diamonds. A spoon rests beside it, tarnished but clean. It settles on the empty chair at the teacher's desk. The chair is slightly askew, as if someone just rose from it. The wood is smooth from years of use. The seat holds the faint impression of a body, and if you listen very closely, past the sigh of the wind, past the creak of old wood. You might hear it, the soft scratch of chalk on slate, a sound both fleeting and eternal. It is the sound of a child learning to trust their own mind, the rustle of a page turned, slow, deliberate, as if studying a difficult passage. The paper whispers secrets to the silence. A child's voice, clear and small, speaking a moment of understanding. The voice holds no name, only relief. It is the sound of a door opening inside a young heart, and the answer, warm as a hearth, a quiet hum of approval, like a hand resting on a shoulder. No words, only presence. The hum vibrates in the air like a plucked string. Time has passed. The village is gone. Houses crumbled. Gardens wild. Weeds push through the cracked flagstones by the steps. The road is overgrown with nettles and brambles. Wild roses climb the stone walls where cottages once stood.
But the schoolhouse stands.
Not because it is strong, but because it is needed. Its windows face the valley like watching eyes. The glass reflects the sky, holding clouds and stars within its panes. For longing, when it is born of love, does not fade. It settles into the corners of rooms. It waits in the silence between heartbeats. It watches from the shadows. It is the warmth in a stone long after the fire dies. The daffodils still push through the cracked flagstones by the steps each spring. They bloom yellow as butter, as if Miss Pryce planted them herself. Their petals tremble in the breeze, facing the sun like small faces. In summer, the ivy thickens, weaving a green curtain over the windows, shading the desks from the harsh sun. The leaves whisper secrets to the empty chairs. Bees drone lazily in the ivy blooms, heavy with pollen. In autumn, leaves gather in the corners, dry and crisp, rustling like children turning pages. They carry the scent of earth and endings. Squirrels bury acorns in the leaf litter near the door. In winter, the frost etches delicate patterns on the glass, like invisible fingers tracing the alphabet. The patterns bloom and fade with the sun. Ice feathers the window panes, turning the world outside into a dream. No one tends the garden. No one sweeps the steps. Yet the path remains clear, as if walked upon each night by small, careful feet. The gravel is smooth and undisturbed at dawn. Dew glistens on the stones like scattered pearls. The villagers do not speak of the schoolhouse often, but they do not tear it down. They leave it be. They know some places are not meant to be used. They are meant to be remembered. They nod toward it when passing, a quiet gesture of respect. The bell rope still hangs, though the bell is silent. If you touch it, the rope feels cold and stiff, yet it sways slightly, as if just released. The fibers are rough under your fingers, worn smooth in one spot by years of pulling. And so the schoolhouse waits, not for ghosts, not for echoes, but for the moment someone remembers what it means to be seen, to be known, to be held in the light of another's attention. It waits like a seed in the earth, patient and sure. Perhaps that is why, on the stillest of nights, when the world is hushed and the stars burn bright, the front door creaks open just a sliver, just enough to let the cold air in. The hinges groan softly, protesting the movement after so long, just enough to let the warmth out. Just enough to remind us that some doors never truly close. The hinge sighs like a breath held too long. The wood exhales the scent of pine and old varnish. The wind carries the scent of chalk dust and wood smoke through the gap. It mingles with the frost and the distant cry of an owl. The owls call echoes down the valley, unanswered. Inside, the stove glows faintly in the dark. Its embers breathe red in the shadows. The warmth is gentle, persistent, like a promise kept. The iron plates radiate heat long after the flames die. The ruler rests on the desk, parallel to the edge. Its wood is worn smooth by years of use. It waits for a hand to lift it again. The ruler's edge is nicked from chalk dust and small fingernails. The barley sugar jar sits where it always has. The sugar inside is crystallized now, fused into a single amber block. It catches the firelight like old honey. Dust motes dance above it in the slanted moonlight, and in the silence, the schoolhouse holds its breath, waiting, watching, remembering. The light from the stove paints the walls gold. Shadows stretch across the floor like reaching hands. The world outside moves on, but here, time slows. Here, love endures. Here, a teacher's devotion lives in the dust, the frost, the turning globe. The globe's axis trembles as a draft slips through the window. The door creaks softly shut as the wind shifts. But the warmth remains. The promise remains. The light remains. The embers glow brighter for a moment, as if fed by an unseen breath. In the highlands of northern Britain, where the land rises into moor and mountain like the spine of an ancient beast, and the lochs lie still as dark mirrors beneath the sky, there once stood a coaching inn called the Weary Traveller. The path to its door was narrow, winding through heather and bracken, soft underfoot like a sigh. It was not grand, not the kind with brass plaques or liveried porters. It was small, just 2 stories of rough, hewn stone, its roof thick with moss, its windows small and deep-set, like eyes that had seen too much and learned to look gently. The stone was dark with age, streaked by centuries of rain. A crooked sign hung above the door, painted with a traveler leaning on a staff beneath a crescent moon. The paint had faded, but the image remained, not of arrival, but of pause. The wood of the sign was warped by damp, its rope frayed but holding. The inn stood at the edge of a loch so still it reflected the stars not as points of light, but as soft smudges, like memories half remembered. Reeds whispered along its banks, their dry rustle carried on the evening air. Herons stood motionless in the shallows, their silhouettes sharp against the water. The loch's surface held the sky in perfect stillness, undisturbed by wind or boat. And on clear nights, the northern lights would ripple overhead, not with fanfare, but with a quiet grace, as if the sky itself were breathing. The colors shifted like slow breaths, green then violet, then silver, painting the moor in living light. For 60 years, an old woman named Moira ran the inn. She moved through its rooms like a shadow given form, her steps soft on the worn floorboards. She was not young when she began. Her hair was already silver, her hands already mapped with lines. The lines told stories of work and worry, of cold mornings and long nights. She had lost her husband to fever in the winter of 22, and her son, a quiet boy with his father's eyes, to a fall on the ice the following spring. Grief had hollowed her out, leaving her like an empty cup, thin and fragile at the edges. But instead of closing the inn, she opened it wider. The door was never locked before dusk. A light always burned in the window. She believed that exhaustion was not just in the body, but in the soul. And sometimes the soul needed more than sleep. It needed permission to stop, to sigh, to be still. The weight of being human was heavy, and she offered a place to set it down. So she began serving a specialty. She gathered heather at dawn, when the dew still clung to the purple bells. The heather smelled of honey and earth, sharp and sweet. She cut bog myrtle from the marshes, its leaves sharp and fragrant, releasing their scent when crushed between her fingers. The myrtle grew in damp hollows, hidden from the wind, and she added something she never named, perhaps a pinch of dried chamomile from her windowsill, perhaps a petal from the last rose of summer, perhaps simply the quiet intention of peace. Her hands moved with care as she measured the blend. She steeped it in an iron pot over the peat fire until the steam carried the scent through every room, earthy, sweet, calming, like the air after rain. The steam curled in the cold air, carrying warmth and stillness. Guests who drank it before bed would sleep so deeply. They would wake feeling as if days had passed, though only hours had gone by. Their faces would be softer in the morning, their eyes less shadowed. One man, a soldier returning from war, stayed a single night. His hands shook even when still. His eyes darted at every sound. He barely spoke, eating his stew with his head bowed, his shoulders tight with tension. Moira gave him the tea without a word, placing the cup on the table with a hand that did not tremble. The cup was chipped but clean, warmed by the fire. In the morning, he sat at the kitchen table, staring into his empty cup. His voice was rough as stone, but his eyes held a quiet wonder. He spoke of a dream where time had folded back on itself, where grief had not yet found him. He wept then, not from pain, but from relief. It was the first night he had not dreamed of battle in 10 years. The lines on his face seemed less deep. Another guest, a woman who had walked 50 miles to escape a life that no longer fit, arrived with blisters on her feet and silence in her eyes. Her cloak was damp with mist, her boots caked with mud. She drank the tea, slept 12 hours straight, and woke to find Moira had mended the tear in her coat and left a fresh loaf on the windowsill. The loaf was still warm, wrapped in a cloth smelling of yeast. Moira did not ask where she was going. She simply said the woman was safe there while she rested. Her voice was low, like stones shifting in a quiet stream. Moira never explained how the tea worked. She would just smile and say that time needed rest too. Even time grew weary from its endless turning. She believed that time was not just a river. It was a traveler. And even travelers need to sit by the fire for a while, to warm their hands and catch their breath. The firelight danced on the walls as she spoke, casting shadows that moved like memories. She would tuck blankets around guests like they were children, wool ones, thick and warm, smelling of lavender and sun. The blankets were folded neatly on a shelf by the hearth, waiting for tired bones. She would stoke the fire until it glowed like a heartbeat, casting long shadows that danced on the walls like old friends. The peat burned slow and steady, filling the room with a soft, smoky warmth. And she would sit in the corner, knitting, her needles clicking like a lullaby, just to keep the silence from feeling lonely. The yarn was wool, dyed with lichen, soft as cloud. She did not ask questions, did not offer advice. She simply made space for grief, for weariness, for the quiet ache of being human. The space itself was the gift. When the last guest left, sometime in the late 1950s, the inn fell silent. The door closed. The light in the window went out. Moira grew older, slower. Her steps on the stairs became careful, measured. She would sit longer by the fire, her knitting resting in her lap. One winter, she did not wake from her nap by the fire. The villagers found her there, hands folded in her lap, a half-finished sock in her basket, the kettle still warm on the hob. The fire had burned to embers. The inn was sealed soon after. The key was lost. The sign grew crooked with age. Ivy climbed the walls, weaving green threads through the stone. But the legend grew. Travelers spoke of a place where the world slowed, just for a moment, where the weight lifted, not gone but held. Now, hikers say that if you are exhausted, truly soul-deep weary, and you sit on the inn's front step at twilight, you'll feel a hand on your shoulder. Not to pull you in, but to say that rest is allowed. The hand is warm, steady, familiar as an old friend. And for a few breaths, the world slows down, just for you. The wind stills. The lock smooths to glass. Your heart finds its rhythm again. Not because the inn offers escape, but because it remembers how much you carry. The stones of the threshold hold the imprint of countless feet, each one heavy with its own story. Not because it erases your burdens, but because it offers you, just for a moment, the grace of setting them down. The porch step is worn smooth by generations of sighs. On certain nights, when the mist curls off the lock like smoke, and the stars are bright enough to read by, the windows glow with a soft, amber light. Not electric, not firelight, but the kind of light that comes from within, like a memory made visible. The glow spills onto the whetstones of the path, warm against the night. And if you listen past the wind, past the lap of water on stone, you might hear it. The soft clink of a teacup on a saucer. The sound is delicate, intimate, like a secret shared over steam. The whisper of a blanket being unfolded. The wool rustles softly, releasing the scent of lavender and sun. A voice, warm as peat smoke, speaking without words. The voice is not heard with the ears, but felt in the chest, like a hand on the heart. Time does not heal all wounds, but sometimes it naps, and in that nap we find the strength to go on. The nap is short, but deep, like the sleep of childhood. The inn knows this. It has always known. Its walls hold the breath of every weary soul who crossed its threshold. And so it waits, not for guests, but for the weary. Not for stories, but for sighs. Not for payment, but for presence. The door does not creak. It sighs, like a body settling into rest. For longing, when it is born of compassion, does not fade. It settles into the stones. It lingers in the steam of a forgotten kettle. It hums in the silence between heartbeats. The kettle still sits on the hob, cold but ready. In spring, the heather begins to bud on the moor, purple tips pushing through the brown grass. The bog myrtle sends up new shoots in the damp hollows. The inn watches, patient and still. In summer, bees drone in the heather, heavy with pollen. The lock shines like a dark mirror under the long daylight. The windows catch the sun, glowing like amber eyes. In autumn, the bracken turns gold, then brown, rustling like pages in a book. Mist rises from the lock in the mornings, curling around thee in like a shawl. The air smells of damp earth and dying leaves. In winter, snow blankets the moor, soft and deep. The inn's roof wears a cap of white. Smoke would rise from the chimney if the fire were lit. The silence is profound, but not empty. The villagers do not speak of the inn often, but they leave offerings on the step, a sprig of heather, a loaf of bread, a jar of honey. They do not knock. They simply leave and walk away, their boots crunching on the frosty path. The offerings disappear by morning, not stolen, absorbed, as if the inn itself had taken them in gratitude. Hikers say the steppe is always dry, even after rain, as if someone had swept it clean for the next weary soul. The wood is smooth, polished by countless hands resting as they gather courage to go on. And on the stillest of nights, when the world is heavy and your bones ache with the weight of being, the inn opens its door, just a crack, just enough to let the warmth out, just enough to let the cold air in, just enough to whisper that you are seen. The hinge groans softly, like a breath held too long. The scent of heather and peat smoke drifts through the gap. It mingles with the frost and the distant cry of a curlew. The curlews call echoes across the lock, unanswered. Inside, the fire glows faintly in the dark. The embers breathe red in the shadows. The warmth is gentle, persistent, like a promise kept. The hearthstones hold the day's heat long into night. The teacup sits on the table, waiting. The cup is chipped but clean. Steam would rise from it if the kettle were hot. The blanket lies folded on the chair, wool thick and warm. It smells of lavender and sun, though no one has aired it in years. The fold lines are soft like old wrinkles, and in the silence, the inn holds its breath, waiting, watching, remembering. The light from the hearth paints the walls gold. The world outside moves on, but here time slows. Here compassion endures. Here Moira's presence lives in the steam, the stones, the sigh of the door. The door creaks softly shut as the wind shifts, but the warmth remains, the promise remains, the light remains. The embers glow brighter for a moment, as if fed by an unseen breath. Behind a crumbling manor in the quiet countryside of southeast England, where the hedges grow thick with hawthorn and the lanes are lined with wild roses, there grows a walled garden. The manor stones are soft with age, its windows clouded like tired eyes. The garden lies hidden from the road, known only to those who walk the old footpaths. Its gate hangs open on rusted hinges, swaying gently in the breeze like an invitation that never closes. The wood is silvered by rain and sun, smooth to the touch from countless hands that never came. Its paths are overgrown with moss and clover, soft underfoot, muffling sound as if the earth itself is holding its breath. The moss is thick and velvety, deep green in the shadows, silver where the light touches. But in November, when the trees stand bare, when the sky is low and gray, when the world seems to fold in on itself in preparation for winter, a strange rose blooms. The air grows sharp with the scent of decay and promise. Its petals are not red or pink, but the color of old paper, faded photographs, childhood socks lost to the laundry, the inside of a seashell held to the ear. They catch the weak winter light in soft, luminous glows. They feel soft as memory, cool as morning dew, and they never fall. They simply fade back into the stem when their time is done, leaving no trace but the scent of rain and regret. The scent lingers long after the petals vanish. The garden belonged to Lady Clara Winthrop, a widow who, in her later years, began collecting things people had lost. She walked the lanes at dawn, her basket swinging at her side, her eyes scanning the ground. Not treasures, not jewels, but the small, quiet things that carry love in their seams. A child's hair ribbon found fluttering in a park, still tied in a careful bow. The ribbon was faded blue, its edges frayed from being tied and untied 100 times. A soldier's letter left on a train seat, the ink smudged by rain, the words underlined with a hand that trembled. The paper was thin, almost translucent, worn soft by being carried close to the heart. A single pearl earring dropped in a market square, its clasp bent from being worn too long. The pearl caught the light like a tear, cool and perfect against the grime of the cobbles. A ticket stub from a seaside holiday in 1923. The ink faded to ghostly blue. The ticket was creased from being folded and unfolded, the destination blurred by time. A wooden toy horse, one ear chipped, its paint worn smooth by small hands. The horse's eyes were dark buttons, its mane carved in simple lines that held the memory of a child's grip. She would bring them home in the pocket of her coat or the basket on her arm. Her coat was wool, thick and warm, smelling of lavender and wood smoke. The basket was woven from willow, its handle polished smooth by years of use. She would wash them gently in rainwater collected from the barrel by the kitchen door. The rainwater was soft, clear, holding the sky in its depths. She used a cloth the color of oatmeal, thin from many washings. She would dry them on a linen cloth in the sun, as if they were fragile birds that had fallen from the nest. The cloth lay on the stone sill, warmed by the weak winter sun, the items arranged with care. And then, at dusk, she would walk to the garden, kneel on the damp earth, and bury them just beneath the surface, where the roots could find them. Her knees left prints in the soft soil, dark and temporary. As she patted the soil back into place, she would whisper words that were not prayers, but promises. The words were soft, meant for the earth alone, not for human ears. She did not pray to God. She did not light candles. She simply believed that to be forgotten is the truest kind of death, and that memory, even when held by the earth, is a kind of life. Her belief was as quiet as the garden itself. One spring, roses sprouted where she had buried them. The first bloom appeared near the stone bench, its petals the color of old paper, its stem strong and straight. But these were not ordinary flowers. They held the weight of what was lost. They carried the shape of what was loved. If you stood very still near them at dusk, when the light turns golden and the air smells of wood smoke and damp earth, you would hear faint sounds. Not loud, not clear, but present, like echoes from another room. A lullaby hummed off key. The the way a mother might sing when she was tired but would not stop because her child needed it. The notes were soft, barely there, woven into the rustle of leaves. A name called from another room, clear, loving, expectant. The voice held warmth and impatience, the sound of a home waiting, the rustle of a letter being unfolded, the crisp sound of paper holding secrets too tender for daylight. The paper whispered its story to the wind, then fell silent again. Visitors say the garden does not want your tears. It wants your attention. Just a moment to say, I see you. I remember you. The attention is the offering. The remembrance is the gift. Once, a young woman came to the garden. She had lost her father the winter before. He had been a quiet man, a gardener himself, who had taught her the names of every bird that visited their yard. Her boots were muddy from the lane, her hands clenched in her coat pockets. On his last birthday, she had given him a dried daisy pressed between 2 sheets of wax paper, the same kind he had picked for her mother decades ago. The daisy was pale yellow, its petals fragile as moth wings. She left it on the stone bench at the garden center. The bench was cold, its surface worn smooth by time and touch. The daisy lay like a secret in the afternoon light. The next morning it was gone. The bench was empty, the stone cool and clean. But in its place, a single rose had bloomed, its center the exact shade of her father's favorite sweater, the one he had worn every Sunday, its elbows threadbare from leaning on fences and porches and the edge of her bed when she was sick. The rose held the shape of his care. Another time, a boy, no more than 10, left a broken toy soldier on the path. Its paint was chipped, one arm missing, its rifle long since lost to the grass. The soldier's face was worn smooth, its eyes faints of black paint. He had carried it everywhere until the day his dog buried it, and forgot where. The boy's hands were dirty from digging, his eyes red from crying when he finally gave up. By dawn, a rose had opened nearby, its petals streaked with the same faded blue paint, its edges worn soft like well-loved cloth. The rose stood straight and proud, as if the soldier had found his place at last. An old man once left a railway ticket, his first journey alone, to visit his grandmother in the city, aged 12. He had kept it in his wallet for 60 years. The ticket was brittle, the edges curled like dry leaves. He had walked 20 miles to reach the garden, his step slow but steady, his breath fogged in the cold air, his hand trembling as he placed the ticket beneath the rose bush. He whispered words about apple cake, about a kitchen warm with cinnamon and laughter. The words hung in the air like steam from a cup. The next day, the ticket was gone, but the air around the garden smelled faintly of cinnamon and baked apples all afternoon. The scent was warm, sweet, comforting, like a hand on the shoulder. The manor is empty now. The roof leaks. The windows are clouded. Weeds push through the flagstones of the courtyard. The wind sighs through broken panes. But the garden thrives. The roses return each November, without fail. The moss grows thicker. The clover spreads. The gate still swings on its hinges, inviting the world in. Every November, without fail, the roses bloom. Their petals hold the color of memory, the texture of longing, the quiet dignity of things loved and lost. And if you leave something small, a button from a favorite coat, a bus pass from a first job, a seashell from a childhood holiday, on the stone bench, by morning, it will be gone. Not stolen, just remembered. The earth takes what is offered with gentleness, not because the garden seeks to keep, but because it knows how it feels to be forgotten. The soil holds the weight of absence with care, not because it hoards the past, but because it honors what mattered. Each buried object becomes a root, a stem, a petal. Clara is gone now. No one tends the roses. No one weeds the paths. Yet the garden remains. Wild, yes, but not untended. As if the earth itself has taken up her work. The roots remember the way. On still nights, when the moon is full and the frost begins to silver the grass, the roses glow faintly, not with light, but with presence. The glow is soft, internal, like a heartbeat seen through skin. And if you sit on the bench and close your eyes, you might feel it, the brush of a hand on your shoulder. Not heavy, not demanding, but steady and kind. The whisper of a voice you have not heard in years. The voice is not loud, but clear, like a bell heard from far away. The quiet certainty that you, too, are held in memory. The certainty settles in your bones, warm and sure. For longing, when it is born of love, does not fade. It takes root. It grows. It blooms in the darkest season. The roots go deep, beyond sight, beyond reach, but they hold fast. And so the garden waits, not for visitors, but for offerings, not for praise, but for remembrance, not for permanence, but for witness. The witness is the gift that keeps the lost alive. Because to be remembered is to be loved across time. The love does not die with the person. It moves into the world, into the earth, into the hands of those who remember. And love, once given, does not evaporate. It settles into the soil. It rises in the petals. It lingers in the air after you have gone. The scent remains long after the flower fades. And on the stillest of nights, when the world feels too loud and your heart feels too heavy, the garden opens its arms, just enough to whisper. The whisper is not heard with the ears, but felt in the chest. You mattered. You still do. The words are not spoken. They are known. In an old boarding house in a city of stone and mist in the north, where the streets narrow into alleys that remember every footstep, and the fog curls around street lamps like smoke from a long-dead fire, there was once a hallway on the third floor that did not appear on any blueprint. The building's bones held secrets the papers could not contain. Not the landlords, not the fire inspectors, not even the architect's original drawings, yellowed with age and tucked away in a council archive. It simply existed, as if the building had grown it in its sleep, like a dream the walls could not forget. The hallway was not an error. It was a gift. The hallway was narrow, just wide enough for one person to pass without brushing the walls. The walls were close, intimate, smelling of old plaster and beeswax. The floorboards were worn smooth by decades of quiet footsteps, and they creaked in a particular way, not a sharp snap, but a low, sighing groan, like would remembering a weight it once carried. Each board had its own voice, its own story of passage. The wallpaper, once a deep green with gold vines, had faded to the color of old tea, its pattern softened by time into something almost sacred. The vines curled like tendrils of memory, reaching for something just out of sight. Along one side stood 10 doors, all painted the same faded green, all numbered in brass digits, slightly tarnished. 301, 302, 303 up to 310. The brass was dull but not dirty, worn smooth by generations of fingertips. But at the very end in 11, unmarked, unhinged, not in the sense of being broken, but as if it had never needed a hinge at all. It hung in the frame by some quiet agreement with the air, always slightly ajar. Never more than a hand's width, never less. The gap was constant, a promise held without effort. The wood was smooth, dark, and cool to the touch, like river stones shaped by years of current. No one knew who it belonged to. The door had no keyhole, no handle, no lock. It simply waited, patient and still. Tenants would move in, students with second-hand trunks and ink-stained fingers, widows with lace curtains and quiet eyes, clerks with tired shoulders and pocket watches that no longer kept time. And within a week, without fail, they would come down to the front desk and ask about the extra door. Their voices would be low, uncertain, as if speaking the question made it more real. The landlord, a man named Mr. Hargrove, would just shrug, polishing a teacup with a cloth that had seen better days. His hands were steady, his eyes holding a knowledge he would not share. He would say only that it had always been there, and that was all. The words were not an answer, but a boundary. Some things are not explained, they are experienced. But here is the strange part, strange not in a frightening way, but in the way old houses hold their breath around certain things. People who peeked inside never saw a room. They sought a feeling. The feeling took shape in light and texture, in scent and sound, but it was not a place. It was a moment held in amber. One woman, newly widowed, stood there one rainy evening, drawn by a restlessness she could not name. She had been sorting through her husband's things, his coats, his books, his pipe, and found herself walking the halls of the boarding house as if searching for something she had lost but could not name. Her footsteps were slow, her hands empty. She pushed the door open just enough to look in, and gasped. The breath left her body, like a sigh held too long. There, bathed in golden afternoon light that should not have existed on a gray November day, was her childhood bedroom. The light was warm, honeyed, thick with dust motes dancing in the air. The quilt her mother had stitched from scraps of old dresses, blue calico, red gingham, yellow floral, still lay on the bed, slightly rumpled, as if she had just climbed out of it. The quilt smelled of lavender and sun-dried cotton. The porcelain doll with one eye missing, a gift from her grandmother, sat propped against the pillow. Its painted smile was chipped but kind. Its dress faded to the color of old roses. And from the kitchen below, the faint, familiar hum of her mother's voice, singing a lullaby she had not heard since she was 6. The notes were soft, off-key, loving. They filled the air like steam from a kettle. She did not step through. She did not need to. The sight alone filled a hollow space inside her she had not known was empty. The hollowness was not gone, but it was held. She stood there until her feet grew cold, then turned and went downstairs, her step lighter, as if she had been given back a piece of herself. The weight on her shoulders had not vanished, but it had shifted, made bearable by memory. Another time, A university student, exhausted from exams, far from home, missing his grandfather more than he had realized, paused at the door late one night. His eyes were red from reading, his mind a storm of doubt and ink. He had been staring at a blank page for hours, the words refusing to come. The silence of his room had grown loud, pressing in on him like walls. He peered in and saw his grandfather's study. The room was warm, lit by a single lamp on the desk, its shade frayed at the edges. The smell of pipe tobacco, rich and earthy, filled the air. The scent was deep, comforting, like old books and leather. The leather armchair, worn soft at the elbows, sat by the fire. The fire was not lit, but the chair held the shape of a body, as if someone had just risen. And on the desk, the very book he had loved as a boy, The Starry Voyager, open to the page where his grandfather had written, in the margin, in his neat, slanting hand, a note of love meant just for him. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but clear. He stood there until the streetlights outside dimmed for the night. The city fell silent around him. Then he walked back to his own room and, for the first time in months, slept without dreaming of failure. The dream that came was of stars and a hand on his shoulder. An old man, retired and alone, once lingered there on a winter morning. His children lived far away. His wife was gone 10 years. He had come to the city to be near a hospital, but mostly he sat by the window and watched the rain. His days were long, his hands idle, his thoughts circling like birds with no place to land. Through the crack in the door, he saw a beach he had not visited since he was 10 years old. The beach was wide and empty, the sand pale gold under a clear sky. The tide was just turning. Waves rolled in with a soft, rhythmic hush, pulling back to reveal wet sand that shone like a mirror. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and clear, the sound of freedom and sky. And there, knee-deep in the surf, was his younger self, laughing, arms outstretched, catching the spray, his hair dark and wet, his face unlined by time. The boy's eyes were bright with joy, his mouth open in a laugh that carried across the years. He did not cry. He just whispered a single word, soft as breath. "Ah, there you are." The word was not sadness. It was recognition. It was homecoming. And then he turned and went downstairs to make tea, his step a little lighter, as if he had been reminded that joy once lived in him and might again. The joy was not gone. It was waiting. No one ever stepped through. They did not need to. The threshold was not meant to be crossed. It was meant to be witnessed, because the door was not an entrance. It was a mirror for the heart. The mirror did not show the face, but the soul's deepest longing. It did not show what was lost. It showed what was still loved. The love was not in the past. It was alive, waiting to be remembered. It did not offer escape. It offered recognition. The recognition was a hand on the shoulder in the dark, saying, "I know you. I see what you carry." When the building was sold and renovated, walls torn out, floors refinished, the old gas lamps replaced with LEDs, the hallway was sealed. The new walls were smooth, white, silent. The 11th door was covered over with plaster and paint. The plaster was thick, seamless, hiding the wood beneath like a secret buried too deep to find. The new owners installed a sleek kitchenette where the landing once was, with stainless steel and spotlights and no place for ghosts. The spotlights were bright, harsh, leaving no shadows for memory to hide in. But the building remembers. Its stones hold the echo of footsteps, the sigh of floorboards, the warmth of a hand on a doorknob. And the new tenants? They still report it. Their voices are hushed when they speak of it, as if afraid to scare it away. On quiet nights, when the city sleeps and the fog curls around the street lamps like smoke, they hear it. The sound is not loud, but unmistakable. A soft click, like a latch releasing, like a promise kept. And at the end of a perfectly normal corridor, now with only 10 doors, all properly numbered, a space appears. The space is not empty. It is full of light, of memory, of love. Just for a moment, just long enough to remind you that you are still loved by the past. The past does not haunt. It holds, not because it wants you to stay, but because it never stopped holding space for you. The space is warm, familiar, safe. Not because it demands your return, but because love, once given, does not evaporate. It settles into the grain of wood. It waits in the silence between heartbeats. It watches from the corners of old rooms. And sometimes on the stillest of nights, it opens a door. The opening is not an invitation, but a whisper. Just a crack. Just enough to let the light out. Just enough to let the cold air in. Just enough to say, I am here. For longing, when it is born of belonging, does not fade. It echoes in empty halls, a sound both lonely and full. It lingers in the grain of old wood, in the tarnish of brass numbers, in the sigh of floorboards under unseen feet. It waits in the space between breaths, in the pause before a name is spoken, in the quiet after a lullaby ends. And so the door remains, not as a mystery, but as a mercy. The mercy is the reminder that you are not alone, not as a ghost, but as a gift. The gift is the love that never left, even when you thought it was gone, because everyone at some point needs to be reminded you were seen, not just noticed, but truly seen, in your joy and your sorrow. You were known. Your name was spoken with warmth, your presence felt as a gift. You were loved, not perfectly, but deeply, in ways that outlast time and distance and even death. And that love still knows your name. The name is not spoken aloud. It is held in the silence. It is written in the light that spills from a door that should not be there. The fire burns low, but it does not go out. No matter how dark the night, a light waits for you here.